Welcome to another episode of Ingwalo Labalobi. My name is Angela Swanda, and today in the studio I have with me Philani Nyoni. And this is not a new name, especially in the literal spaces. If you are a books person or if you are an arts person, you know this man. He has won multiple awards, and he is a mentor to several authors, and he's also an editor. Philani, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Angie.
Thank you so much for coming through. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
The pleasure is mine.
All right. I know I have done part of the introduction, but for some of our viewers who have not yet come across the name, can you please introduce yourself?
Well, first of all, the name is Philani Nyoni.
Oh, okay.
The A is very important. It's my favorite part of my name
Okay.
because people don't believe it's my name. But my name is Pen. I'm a wordsmith of pedigree. Sometimes I look like shit, but don't pity me.
Oh,
Sometimes I dress corporate, but that don't mean I'm a robot. Matter of fact, I'm like Optimus in his prime, transforming these niggas' minds, buzzing like bumblebees into something BEE, or to make them B. Guess what I'm saying is BME. It's Black mental empowerment, exposing your environment, hoping you get to see these demons flapping around on angel wings, these humans claiming to be sentient beings, those politicians and other lie-maticians, those poisonous pastors preaching propaganda from the pulpit,
come on.
those Jesus peace-packing pimps prostituting the virgin at the temple. They can't school my thought. I only learn by the pupil. People in your parish stay poor while your wealth seems to triple. Tell me, Mr. Preacher, can even heal a cripple or turn water to wine and make me forget your evil? Of course you can't. You can't. All you have is a smile and a dimple, squeezing blackheads till they pass. Like a fucking pimple, see the Pope's the biggest pimp here. The truth is as simple, and Christianity fucked us all. Its dick was a stipple.
Come on.
My name is Pan. And I speak that shit you're afraid to think. That shit you subscribe to Satanists. So go ahead, call me Illuminati, while I illuminate your knot with art more Nazi than Hitler.
Come on.
Yeah, that is it. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is that is me.
Now that was an introduction. Now that was an introduction. Okay. First things first. I'm curious, especially after that quite introduction. What does your information diet look like?
I'm a glutton. I'm a pig.
Okay.
I eat and enjoy everything. So I usually joke to some people and they ask me, Pen, how did you know that? Like, I'm a writer, I know everything. Because that's the role of being a writer, right? You have to tell stories and tell them intimately and nuanced. So you have to be really, even the things that you do not like, you have to read about them. You have to understand where the next person is coming from, why this happened, causality, and all that. So I am a glutton. I read everything and anything. Yes.
Okay. Guess I'm also I'm also a pig. But what would you say is your favorite in that mix of everything? What do you prefer mostly?
I like writers who challenge me. So, people who just break the mold. Rushdie, Kafka. Marechera was one of them. Bessie Head. There's just a whole lot of them. Bukowski. Just a whole lot of guys that I really enjoy. People who expand the mind. Borges is one of them. Just something that's out of the box, something that changes the way you look at the world and the way you look at yourself.
So you don't just read.
I Unfortunately, when I start a book, I have to finish it. There's something like even a
Even
bad
if
movie.
it's boring.
Even if it's boring, I have to finish it.
Oh no.
Just I'm what they call an informed hater,
Oh, okay.
right? I'm an informed hater. One of my favorite hobbies is actually watching bad movies. Like, oh my god, this
Okay.
movie's so bad. Especially if it's the script or it's the visual effects. You know those BC rate movies. Yeah, those ones where there's certain actors that when you see, like,
Yeah.
there's no
Yeah.
money. Those kind of movies. I just like watching those, and it's a hobby.
No, that's new to me.
It's a hobby, so
That's new.
fascinating. Like, wow, this thing's so terrible.
And you continue watching it
Yeah,
already.
yeah. It's such an amazing feeling. You should try it.
I think I will. I
Yeah,
think I will because I've said I hated certain books and somebody will be like, but did you know that ABCD happens Pambili? And I'm like, no, I have
What?
no idea
Yeah.
because I just read the first part and I was like, no, this is bad.
Yes,
This is
yes.
so bad.
I think there was one guy, was it William Burroughs? I couldn't finish his book. It was just so dense and all over the place.
Okay.
But it's kind of a classic. I can't remember the title, Subway or something like that, Underground or something like that. But I couldn't finish it because I put it away for a while. Not that I've discarded it completely, but
Okay.
I come back to it and I lay it aside and then I come back to it later on. Not just throw it away completely, like, no, I'm never looking at this for the rest of my life. Because sometimes it's about who you are at that point in time in life. So something may not resonate with you at that point, but then you read that after a certain experience or when you're older or something else has happened to you, that it actually resonates and clicks. You know.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah, I try to finish everything that I start reading, even if it takes me a long time. And the good thing is I read several books at a time. So
Okay. I've heard people say that. And I'm not able to keep up somehow, even when I'm watching a film. There's no way I can tell you that I'm watching 3 series at the same time, where I'm watching this and watching that at the same time. I have to go to, if it has like 10 seasons, I have to go through the 10 seasons before I start on
you have to
something
binge
new.
it and
Yeah. That's me. I cannot read this book and that book at the same time.
for me, there's something about digesting.
Okay.
Sometimes something is so beautiful and requires a bit of thought between chapters that you really want to savor it, and you don't want to just go through it all, all at once. Especially if you find a good book and you really. One of the books that did that to me was John Steinbeck's East of Eden.
Okay.
It was so beautiful. Like after every chapter, I'd have to stop and take a walk. And take a walk, like, wow, what did I just read?
Okay. You have won a lot of awards, and your work has gotten recognition. I want to know, amongst the books that you have published or amongst the pieces that you have written, is there any that you feel like it was worth it? Not because it got an award. You are proud of it, not because it got an award, but because of the process that you went through writing it.
I love all my children the same.
Okay. All right.
They're equally beautiful. At the same time, every one of them, the process is fascinating and interesting. So, for example, with this one, with Filtram, it was after the events of November 2017. Whether you call it a coup or National Democratic Project or whatever you call it. So it was just another. It was recording a transition in in history, a very important national moment and personal moment for me. My first one, Once a Love, Always a Fool, of course, it was my first. It's, it taught me everything I would later use in life as a publisher, it introduced me to the industry. That one, Pen Still Inking, we wrote it during COVID with Zita. So he was stuck in Pretoria, I was stuck in Bulawayo, and we'd call each other and eventually like, yo, let's write a book. Yeah. And just, it's tiny, but it was written by two men during COVID. But that whole process, it was a fascinating process going through that. The Testament of Black Jesus, I spent 6 years working on it. Most of my works take about 3 years to accomplish. But
That's quite a lot.
yeah,
Quite a
the
long
Testament,
time.
it took me 6 years to get to print.
Okay. And when it came out, it just stole all the attention that
Oh
was
yeah,
there.
it had to. It had to. I think it's a very fascinating book, and it's very polarizing as well. In that you have some of the woke Africans who will tell you Jesus was black. I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe, but he was born in the Middle East.
God is a woman.
God is a woman, a black woman. And then you have the Christians like, why are you saying Jesus is black? And I say, why are you worshiping a God that doesn't look like you? you know. So you're getting this steam from both sides. But the interesting thing is, when they read it, both sides of the camp, when they read it, they actually appreciate it. It's the artistry, it's the message in it, which is basic humanism, Ubuntu, which is, I think, if you take away the hocus pocus, the Harry Potter side of Jesus Christ, you remain with a man who just told us to love one another, and we killed him for it.
Speaking of the book, it took 6 years. Sorry, when you are talking right now, I'm just trying to think 6 good years, and I'm thinking of everything that I've accomplished or been through within 6 years. Was there a moment during the process where you thought it was a total disaster, or it seemed like it wouldn't make it?
I think there were more times when I thought I really had a good thing,
Okay.
and then I would write myself into a corner. So the original Jesus character, their philosophy ended up going to a character who became the Baptist, because I'd written myself into a corner.
Okay.
And I couldn't really expand from there. And it was a bit more militant. So the more I kept working on it, then I realized, no, you know what, I have to develop a separate character for this. So then I developed the Baptist, and then I kept working on the Jesus character. I went on a different tangent, which later became the philosophy that Mkhanyisilo embodies in the final product. So we had one draft that was called The Passions of Black Jesus, which I turned into a one-man play. I performed it in Harare, 2019, I think. Yes, 2019. And it was successful. It got a standing ovation. So I wanted to stage it in Bulawayo again. And when I started looking at the script, I said, no, I can do more with this.
Okay.
So the hardest part was just that I kept adding and adding and adding onto it. I always felt it was incomplete. But I think from the first time, I recognized that I had something special going on here. And I just wanted to get it to the best shape possible. The other thing that made it hard to put it out quickly was that I started with the format that I started with. So because I was writing an epic, I wanted to have dramatic structure in it, and so that it has that flow. And I decided the best way to do that was to write it in the form of a stage play.
Okay.
So I first formatted it as a stage play, and then I began substituting and, collating it into the final form. I think we actually designed a version of that with Musani, where I was like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I can't write the epic. Let's just publish a stage play. I can't do this anymore. we actually wrote it. We actually started designing it, and when he sent it to me, and before I opened it, I called him and I said, "I think you're gonna hate me." I just had an epiphany. So something that had taken because of the strongest draft that I wrote for the stage play was in 2020, and so it took me 4 years to be like, you know what, I can't do this anymore. 2024, I said, you know, let's just publish the stage play. But then in a single day, I finished it. I just had one single epiphany. I can't remember what video I watched in the morning, and I didn't even finish it. I just stopped it,
Okay.
and I just started rewriting everything. Usani sent in the design. You know, I said, you're gonna hate me, but you're gonna have to start again.
I think the creative process is the most brutal part of anything.
It is. It is.
When we then see the final product, we just, but the creative process, I think, is the most brutal on
Oh yeah,
anyway.
yes, it is, and I think that's why I respect my work, and I respect every published work, especially if it comes out, with some form of decency, and it kind of keeps me humble. And in that, I usually tell people that if I knew how to shit gold every time I hold a pen, I would have 99 less problems in my life. But it's so humbling and fascinating to see how the work evolves when you do it, and you get into the writing room with one idea, and what comes out at the end is something completely different. I think that's also why I refer to my works as my children. You can have your child and say, "Oh, this one is going to be an engineer," or you have your little baby and you call him doctor. He's going to stab people. You'll be robbing us of our phones in the future, or you become something else completely different.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, in a way, I like to have some level of control with my work, but in the end, they decide what they want to be, and that's the part that keeps me humble.
I think that's the creative process.
Oh
You know,
yes,
you think you have a clear picture of what you want to come up with, and during the process, it just becomes this different thing. And when you look at it, it's beautiful.
oh yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there in your writing or in other people's writing or in all the subjects that are explored through writing, is there a topic that you think it's regarded as a boring topic, but you feel like, or you are convinced that it could be something great if people were to look at it with a different lens? It's more poetic, a topic that you feel like it's actually more poetic, but it's considered boring.
Um, I think there's only good and bad writing
Okay.
at the end of the day.
No bad, bad.
No bad topic, no
No
bad subject
boring
matter.
topics.
No, I think there's only good and bad writing.
Is it?
Yeah.
I know boring topics.
Okay, give me one.
um, Space.
Space is amazing.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I can't really stand conversations around the space, the universe, the when you start talking about there is Mars and there is what I can't stand those. For me, they're just boring.
Okay,
So anything that is written and it's about those, I am likely to toss it aside and find something that talks about gardening. It's a preference thing,
yes.
but for me, that's one topic that I would consider boring.
Oh yeah. So I'm also not very big on space, but if you look at the wider world, some of the biggest franchises in cinema, you have Star Wars, Star Trek, Avatar. So some of the biggest franchises ever, and they're all about space.
and I've viewed them from a distance. So, okay,
And say, no, not
there
this,
you are. I
not this.
appreciate your existence, but I'm
Yes.
good.
But sometimes, and here's where good writing comes in, where the setting, space can be the setting, but the story can be about something else. Avatar, in my opinion, was about colonization and love, especially forbidden love between the colonized and the colonized.
Okay.
It's basically Pocahontas retold with blue people instead of, for lack of a better word, red people. So it's not America, it's now Pandora. You know, it's not about space. Space is the setting, but it's about love. So it's a love story set in space, which is where the idea of good writing comes in. So you can write about anything. Anything, you can set it anywhere, or you can use these characters to tell the story. George Orwell, Animal Farm, same with Nova Blau's Glory. It's an allegory, it's about Zimbabwe. It's set in Zimbabwe, but it's about these animals that are talking. These animals are talking. One is a donkey, and when you start to read between the lines, like lona donkey umuntu, and but you know who that animal is representing, that donkey is representing. Oh, that one is a cat, yeah, and the cat here lawyer and all that, and all these little nuances and
I
stuff.
haven't read that one.
And sometimes you just read it for the pure enjoyment of the language. We come back to Avatar again. Avatar did something amazing with 3D. The colors in Pandora. My only regret in life is that I didn't see Avatar in 3D.
Okay.
That's my only regret. But I saw it in HD.
At least you saw.
It is. I saw it. Yeah, it was a couple of years back. I'm not too eager to see the new ones. But I had to see it, and it was so beautiful. The colors, it was amazing. I wish I'd seen this thing in 3D. So
you're saying there is no, you don't believe there is a boring topic.
No.
Whether the topic is boring or exciting depends on who's writing it and how they're writing it.
execution. My last story that was nominated for an award was called Sunday. It was nominated for the Vanish Short Story Prize in Australia. So my girlfriend asked me, "What's your story about?" And I said, "It's about wind coming through the curtain." And she slapped me. And I said, "No, read it."
That was quite a reaction.
Yeah, like I'm serious. That's just I'm more getting a wind. That's the entire short story.
Okay.
So yeah, if I told you, I want to write a story about more getting windy, so yeah, just the breeze coming through the window. That's
doesn't
short
really
story.
sound like a thing.
No, not a poem, not a sentence. No, a whole short story. And we pulled it off.
Okay. I want us to get into the editing part. I am interested in your writings. However, I am more interested in you as an editor because now you have two chairs. Even when we are looking at someone's work, you have two chairs. You are now sitting in as you being a creative and a writer and being someone who's supposed to judge this person is writing and help correct and bring out the best. How do you, I'm not sure if I can say balance, but how do you make sure that whatever comes out doesn't end up sounding like your work? It remains their voice. How do you maintain their voice, but also, help them elevate it in your, based on your experience?
Yeah, that's a very profound question that I think every editor and every aspiring editor should ask themselves. Because you do not want to, especially if you're a writer as well, you do not want to read what's in your head. You need to read what's on the paper. You need to see the work for what it wants to be. to hear the voice, and then you're just working with the levels, right? It's like sort of being a sound engineer, but you're working with the levels of that person's voice. And it's a very important part of editing because you end up inserting yourself into that text. So you want to look at, does it work? That's the simplest thing for me. Does it work? Can I hear it? I like especially to work with voice. You know, when people talk, they don't use correct grammar and punctuation.
Yeah, we don't.
You know, we don't. We have our nuances and that. But does it work? Is the story structure, can you follow the story? Yes. Is it entertaining? Yes. There are spaces, of course, for, especially with more formal work, where you want to be tight on the grammar, the punctuation, and that. But sometimes it's someone's dialect. And dialect is a very important piece of voice. Dialect is a very important part of identity. So if I say cabin from Blaue, if someone says cabin, like, oh no, I went to this guy's cabin. I'm not saying they went somewhere in the woods. No, why is Sheraton? Yeah. Canada. Yeah. Why Kaya? So that dialect, and we fall into this trap of, we do it in music, we do it in a lot of our art, of trying to write for other people, external people, especially to write for the West, instead of writing our stories in our voice.
That's what I've always felt in most books.
Yes.
Where I am reading your book and I feel like I am not the targeted audience. I'm not the targeted reader. Somehow it's written by someone I know from a place I know, but somehow I can't really resonate with what they are trying to bring out.
Yes. We had a similar one with Nova Blauer's first book, We Need New Names. I read it and it didn't tickle me.
It didn't?
It didn't tickle me. I didn't like it.
Okay.
I was like, A lot of my friends who are based in Zimbabwe were also like, But surprisingly, our diaspora community, Zimbabweans in the diaspora, they really vibed with it. Like, this is us. It reminded them of home, So I think maybe because we were saturated with some of the things in there, that we didn't really recognize the power of the manuscript or what it was intending to do. But it resonated a lot with the diaspora people out there because of the voice that that character Darling was using. And I know if you look at Nova Labalobi, the way she uses language, the way she bends language, same with Brian Chikwaba. And we go back even in history to Alex Tutuola, the Palmer and Trinket. Even the title on its own is leaning that way. But it's voice. Right? Look at Pigeon. The Nigerians, I don't care. Nigerians will say whatever they say.
That's where actually I think I have a question, Konelap, where we look at how we are taught to write in school. Because I think the way that we write as adults trying to get our work out there is influenced mostly by how we are taught. Because when I write a composition and I tend to, apply language the way we use it, it's regarded as wrong. I'm penalized for that. So I think it's the reason why when we are now trying to put our work out there, do you think that has a bearing on?
Yes, I think it does. And then comes the question of who trains artists, who trains writers. And because that English composition is teaching you a different skill. It's teaching you how to communicate formally. It's teaching you how to write reports at work. It's teaching you how to write assignments, how to work in the formal world. But now we should understand creativity on its own. like who is teaching writers? So I learned a lot from reading. You read and you realize, oh wow, this is possible. It reminds me of a story Dambuzo Mareshera told about how he always wanted to be a writer. And then one day he encountered a book by Ngugi wa Thiong'o in a library at St. Augustine's High in Mutare. So he's a little UT and he looks at this book. It's written by a black man and says, wow, we are allowed to write. Black people are allowed to write books. And that changed his entire trajectory.
Okay.
Which is interesting now. If you look at the way Ngugi writes, Ngugi also bans language.
Oh,
Ngugi,
he does.
yeah, yes. He writes from his Kikuyu sensibilities. And in his later years, he refused to publish in English. So he'd first write in Kikuyu and then translate it into English. So who's training writers? And it's unfortunately it's on the honest. The honest is on the writer to go out into the world and find works that resonate with them and develop their style, develop their
See
skills.
what they can
yes.
get out of it.
Yes. It's like I think one analogy that I can give is being trained to fight as a Roman legionnaire versus being trained to fight as a gladiator. It's two different styles. Creatives are gladiators. We're brawlers. We're street fighters. We are, it's like MMA. Anything goes. Whereas, yeah, that side is boxing. Yeah, you know.
All right. You mentioned when you were talking about Ngugi's writing style, it reminded me of a short story that I had an issue with. I was reading an anthology. There's a collection of, I don't know, it was a sequel of books that were, they're titled Now Writing Now Zimbabwe or something like that. It's a collection that is widely found in our local libraries.
I'm trying to think whether it's probably Weaver Press.
It was by
Irene.
Yeah.
I can pronounce it. Yes, Weaver Press. Yes.
So I came across a story that is written by a white lady. The author is white in that collection, but they're in Zimbabwe. And in the story, she has a white character, a white woman who is going to visit some rural areas for a certain project. And she speaks Shona fluently, but the author then translates what she's saying in English. You know how the greeting Shona Makadi Tiripo Magadi yenyu. And the translation goes like, are you here? We are here if you are here. And I had an issue with it to say if this was a Shona author who wrote this, I would be okay with it. But I had issues with it because the author is white. I kind of felt like you should have come up with a way of bringing this line out without really doing that.
Direct translation. Okay, yeah, I won't get into the identity politics over there.
Yes.
But I think translation is a whole rabbit hole that when you go in there, it's difficult to come out unscathed. Translations, we have the same. We have these arguments all the time. How do we bring out the translation? How do we make the vernacular make sense?
My question was, do we have to? Do we have to translate? I've read books that have, is it Greek or Latin? It will be written in a certain way, and then you have to go at the back for
To have
you
a glossary.
yeah. But then with us,
Or a footnote.
with us, we after saying that we want to translate that, we want to explain that if we are not putting brackets, we are trying to somehow justify why we had to.
Yes. It's the same question of should we put italics on African words? when you write an African word, and should you put italics? It's serious language politics.
Okay.
Was it Noam Chomsky who said a language is a dialect with an army and a navy? So the army and the navy part come in. So who are we? It also informs who we are writing for, because if you're going to butcher the language, if you're going to harm the language in order to be heard by someone else, so you're doing them a service and not the story and not the text. So it kind of, ooh, I didn't want to start with today, but it kind of informs who you're writing for and who you're
Okay.
publishing for. The market you're dealing with. So it can be a Zimbabwean story, but it's not for the Zimbabwean market, because Zimbabweans will be like, yeah, okay. But also it ruins the texture of the story. I think
It
if
does.
you, yeah,
Especially if the person reading it can actually understand what you are saying. They don't really need the other part
and
of
they know
it.
you're lying. And look at the work Mel Gibson did with Passion of the Christ and even Apocalypto, where he went back to these these original languages, these native languages in these regions, whether it was in Mexico or in the Middle East, where Jesus was, I think he was talking in Aramaic, and we had to read the subtitles because Jesus was not, he was not a white man, and so we that level of texture. So put the subtitles at the back of the book. Don't write in brackets later on. Don't butcher the translation.
All right. Still on that. Um, when editing other people's work, or when you're reading, let's say you have read a book by Angela, and then Angela publishes another book, and you read the book. Have you ever come across something that you, or let me put it this way: when you are editing, how do you then differentiate, or no, differentiate someone's voice, the writer's voice, their unique voice, and a bad habit that they're refusing to, you know, get out of? Because we like to be different, and someone whose work really really seems different. How then do we get to a point where we say, no, this is their unique voice, or this is just a bad habit that they need to get over?
Well, first of all, does it work? If it works, then okay. I've edited, like I talk trash about motivational writers any day, anytime. Wake me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'll name them and tell them to F off. I've edited their work, and I make it work, and then I'm not going to follow it, and that. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes it's a gimmick. Some writers have serious gimmicks. I'll give you an example of Dan Brown. Dan Brown writes the same story over and over again.
Okay.
Dan Brown, look at them, all of them, from Da Vinci Codes, Inferno, and then all the others. It's basically the same book over and over again.
Okay.
The story has to be concluded in 24 hours, and they have to go to a foreign city, and they have to translate symbols and discover secret societies. All of them, all of Dan Brown's books are like, it's the same. It's the same book. But
Okay.
it's
It's like watching Tomban, FBI or 911,
Yeah.
where there has to be a scenario, ABC. There. Oh, okay. That's not the type of information that I consume, but
So I also hate watching movies that are like an hour and 30 minutes long. Because once I know the genre, then I know the story structure. Then I know, okay, this is what's going to happen.
But you said you like watching bad stuff.
Yes, bad movies. No, there's bad movies, and then there's predictable stuff. So if the movie is an hour 30, even if it's by a decent studio, it can still be predictable.
Okay.
Predictable, and in the same way Dan Brown is predictable. You know that his book is going to go this way. But then there's bad writing.
Okay.
Bad writing or bad movie where you're like, "Ee." Kings of Joburg, season 1.
No. I refuse. I refuse to be taken there.
From the writing to the visuals, continuity. I loved it. Was so horrible. I loved it. So yes, but yeah, there's some things that I don't agree with. But objectively, if you look at it objectively, does it work? Does it work for their target audience? Does it work for their niche audience?
Okay.
And does it work for the story? Does it service the story and the script? If it does, then okay, fine. I'll drink a pill to forget that I ever encountered that manuscript.
Okay. Also, still in the editing industry, we always celebrate the final product. What is it that you have encountered during the process that you feel like it's the real grind? You feel like this is actually like the real thing, and it's uncomfortable, and sometimes you'd rather not do it, but it has to be done for the good of the project.
The hardest parts in any edit, whether it's your own or someone else's work, it's deletions and rewrites. Those.
Yeah. I think that's the reason why I haven't attempted to write a book. It's not like I don't have the ideas, but when I think of somebody telling me that we need to rewrite an entire chapter.
Yeah, like, or delete an entire chapter, like, this is not.
And I have personal attachments to that chapter, and
Yes.
somehow I really think it should be out there. And
Yes.
and the editor says, "Nah, we don't need it."
It's there's a phrase that we like using: "Kill your darlings."
Okay.
Yeah, when you have to kill your darlings, you're like, I really love this line, but it has to go.
And how does it feel? Or well, how does it feel to be the one standing on the other side of the killing?
With the ex.
Telling someone, no, not you killing your own darlings.
Yeah, see the ex,
telling someone to say, okay, here's an ex, kill your darlings.
Cut it off. It's tough, but it has to be done. And I think it has to. I was very fortunate that I worked with some amazing editors. John Apple was one. Some guys that I worked with internationally, like from the New Internationalist, and in my formative years. So editing became a dialogue. We track changes, we write comments. So you're sort of explaining yourself as you go as an editor. And so if you say, okay, this has to go, you sort of explain like, okay, this has to go because it does not sync up with that. Or you've already said this in that part. So choose which way you said it nicer and then keep one of those. So you have a conversation where logic has to take precedence over emotion. And that helps to soften the blow. And Ernest Hemingway, when he was talking about self-editing your work, he said, write drunk, edit sober. So when you're drunk with emotion, when you're just written like, oh my God, I've just written the next best thing, when I'll sell the Bible. Wake up take a few days, step away from it, even if it means stepping away from it mentally, and look at it and say, yeah, okay, but objectively speaking. And that's very difficult.
It is. I was actually going to say that because I do that with the articles that I write as a journalist. And the moment you say, I'm leaving this, and then you go back and read it, maybe it's time for you to submit. It's time for you to submit. The editor wants this one. And you go back and you reread, and then you start saying, instead of saying this, maybe I should have said, and then you start going over it again. And when you think of submitting, like, Let me ask for another day.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah, that's the most difficult part, having to go back
yes.
and
To edit sober, and it's necessary. I think
it is.
when I try to edit drunk, drunk in the sense that I'm so high with all these emotions and I'm just doing
Mm-hmm.
all these passes and going through it, I miss a lot of things. I'm reading what's in my head and not what's on the paper.
The insane part is when you are drunk in those thoughts and emotions. It just feels like this is the best thing to ever exist in this world. It's like they can write, but nothing is gonna compare to this
This
one.
one, my son in whom I'm well pleased.
And then you wake up tomorrow and you're like, we have to.
Oh yeah. So this is which is also what informs my long process with writing, why I take all these years to write these books, because I always come back to these works at
Yeah,
different
I think,
stages.
and I think there should be an emphasis on how this masterpiece took 6 years, because we are in a rush. We are always in a rush because now I'm working on a book, I want it out. Because I'm working on a book, I want it
Oh
out.
yes.
We have, I'm not saying anything is bad about it, but we have authors who are giving us a book every 6 months, every year. Unless if that work has been sitting for a while and you've been working on it and then you just space them in terms of when you're going to release them, I think that makes sense. But then if you are going to be writing now and giving us, writing and giving us, writing and giving us.
As a publisher, I also the being a publisher is actually the hardest part of the whole process, where you have to think about the life of the work. What will it look like? Where are we sending it? Where are we selling it? How are we promoting it? What are we investing in it? And how far do you want to go out with this this work? That's a very, very important part, the post-release strategy. The release strategy and the post-release strategy, packaging of the work and putting it out. I think if you're going to be putting out books every 6 months, you are doing yourself and the work a very big disservice,
True.
because you're still trying to market this. It's still got a shelf life. You're still marketing it. And then now you want us to concentrate on another product.
Ikoremwana.
Goremwana, you end up malnourished. Your children become malnourished.
True. True. For someone whose work has been on international platforms, we have a very few of our authors whose work get to reach that stage. Some books are published and they just end within the book launch. You hear about them within the book launch. An article is written about them publishing a book, and that's the end of the book story. You never get to see it on being nominated elsewhere, being read elsewhere. What do you think that's the reason? Is it because our authors are not reaching out, they are not trying to get to these platforms? Or is it because the work that we're writing doesn't qualify at that certain level?
I think there is a lot of good work outside. In the same way, there's a lot of good music coming out of Bulawayo, a lot of good music coming out of Zimbabwe. But the structures that we use to put our work out there are not adequate enough to compete with the rest of the world or on other stages.
Okay, what do you mean by adequate?
So if we're going to send out, let's say there's something like the Canex Award, which is submissions are made in Kenya and Nigeria, right? So that's about $40 to send those texts there. You have to Botswana Literary Awards. There's something there happening, or there's a festival somewhere else. as an indie author, it becomes difficult for me to transport myself to that festival or to send my works to that festival because I cannot really afford it. I'm using my money for printing, for the book launch, and maybe I've already borrowed that money. So whereas when you're competing with a uh, a publisher, for example, a traditional publisher in other spaces, where you find that your print run as an indie author in Zimbabwe is equivalent to what they send out for book reviews. I think John Steinbeck, his book East of Eden, they sent out about 1,000 copies to book reviewers,
Okay.
right? And who prints 1,000 copies here? So 1,000 copies have gone out to all these spaces. They've been sent out. So I can imagine how much it costs for me to send a book reviewer in Cameroon, in Kenya, to send stock to, you know.
All
So it
right.
becomes a
All
question
right.
of
Makes
access and
sense.
availability to, and also yeah, knowledge that, and our ambitions differ. So maybe someone just doesn't think about, their book going that far.
And do you think the availability or the sustainability of traditional publishing houses would have made a difference in that process?
I think so. Self-publishing or hybrid publishing is which is the dominant form of publishing for creative works, not only in Zimbabwe but most of Africa right now. It's a double-edged sword, especially when it comes to quality control and even just the fatigue that you get as a writer, as a creative. So when you're publishing yourself, you have to replicate everything that a publisher does, and these guys are in this repeatedly every year. You find guys like Amma Books, we used to go all the way up to Europe for book fairs, and they're carrying all these books. They've established relationships. They talk to other publishers there. So if it's time to negotiate a translation, they can offer their books for translation and all that. They are in the business. But with self-publishers or people who hybrid publish, it's not their main forte. It's your side hustle. You can't know everything. You can't operate on the same level as a whole company, a whole
Yeah,
industry,
true.
like, a whole company that has all these experts in the, and probably the person who edited your book is Umakelo Nako, who teaches English.
Yeah,
So
that's
guys,
usually the
you
case
know,
with most people.
yeah. And they don't really know what an editor does, or they haven't.
And those are the same editors who then remove the language part that we're talking about, where now they're trying to turn it into a formal.
Yes.
And when you knew what you were doing,
Yes.
but because you regard this person as an expert in that, you end up going with what they.
So if I go home,
Yes.
so
So I was okay. I almost published a poem, and I sought the expertise of someone I really respected, and I said, I want to submit to this competition, and here's my poem. So I'm reminded by you saying "oh home" because that's what he literally corrected. Like what I'm trying, I'm flowing.
yes.
I'm flowing,
Yeah.
and now when you are doing that, you are removing the flow.
Yes.
When I'm saying "aren't," you said "are not." Okay, so
Because poetry is also about rhythm, right? Actually, writing is about rhythm. Sound is a very important part of writing. So how does it sound? If you throw the rhythm off, you're increasing the syllables, you're increasing my syllable count, you're killing my rhythm. Eesh. No, sorry.
that actually killed my momentum then.
Yeah.
But then I'm hoping I'm gonna find my footing again.
No, you should. You should.
And then in wrapping up, is there a poem that you did probably 10 years ago too far that even up to today, when you look at it, it still looks like a masterpiece to you?
Are you kidding? All my works are good.
No, no.
I don't miss.
But to you, as much as I know you said you love your kids the same and stuff, but what we were talking about when you are, there's something that you wrote back in the days that if you were to look at it now, you'll probably be drawing lines and, saying, instead of saying this, say this, because now you have advanced and everything. That's what I'm referring to.
No, I like them all, especially the published ones. I didn't bring a copy of Once a Love Was a Fool today, but I usually read it, and I've read it throughout the years, and it's always been something amazing to me. I just feel a certain attachment to it, the innocence and the way it's formed. It has a really special soul. That book. So especially the published works, I like them all. I like them all. Some, well, maybe I can not like them very much because of maybe I've changed my political beliefs. I've decided there's no God and it's a Christian poem, but it might also be good in its structure and, it might have good bones, but, maybe I just don't like what it says. So I like my
Okay.
children all the same.
All right, he's maintaining it. I was trying to make him pick at least one, but I felt maybe in parting, you are an icon to a lot of youngsters.
Oh, poor youngsters.
You are someone that when they hear about, if when we're talking about poetry writing, if there is a message that you would have told the younger you, what would you tell him?
Just write. Don't stop, just write. And write as much as you can when you can. And the more you work on something, the more it. Was it Rumi who said that which you seek is seeking you? So keep on chasing it, keep on writing, keep on developing your skills, and who knows where it will be. Enjoy the process most of all. Don't care about the outcome. I mean, these are nice. These are fancy.
They are.
Oh, they are fancy. They're nice. But if you enjoy the process, you'll not get frustrated when the result that you're hoping for, that you're expecting, didn't come out. It becomes the journey becomes the reward. So and the higher you go in this industry, the more people you interact with, the more opportunities you have, the more you get to really come back to that question: why did I start, and why do I do this? So if your foundations are weak, your enterprise will not touch the sky.
Thank you for that, and thank you for gracing us today.
Thank you
This
for
has
having me.
been-
It's been a pleasure.
This has been an amazing conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I really wish we had more time because I still have a lot of questions that I really wanted to ask this man. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of this episode. It's proudly brought to you by Deb3 Events, your partner, lighting services, photography, filming, every event. You cannot have an event that doesn't have Deb3 as a service provider. My name is Angela Swanda. See you on the next episode.